Ever wonder if the heroes who saved their cities could also be their greatest threats? Today, we're unearthing the scandalous lives of Alkibiades and Coriolanus, two ancient figures who walked the razor's edge between legendary patriot and infamous traitor. You clicked for controversy, and you're about to get it. Welcome to Ancient Wisdom Unveiled, where we dissect Plutarch's lives, Volume 1. Plutarch, the master biographer, didn't just record history. He explored the profound moral dilemmas and complex characters that defined the ancient world. These stories challenge everything you think you know about loyalty. But here's the ultimate paradox. Alkibiades, Athens' golden boy, fled to Sparta, then Persia, to advise their enemies against his own city. And Coriolanus, Rome's warrior hero, marched an enemy army to the gates of Rome itself. Were they driven by pure vengeance, cunning strategy, or a twisted sense of justice? Could their betrayal actually be seen as a form of patriotism? Or were they simply power-hungry opportunists willing to sacrifice everything and everyone for themselves? We'll not only unravel their astonishing narratives, but also grapple with the timeless questions of loyalty, identity, and the price of ambition. So, if you're ready to explore history's most fascinating moral gray areas, then hit that like button, tell us your take in the comments, and of course, subscribe to Ancient Wisdom Unveiled for more epic ancient insights. Let's find out. The life of Alkibiades. The line of Alkibiades traced back, men said, to Ajax through Eurysakes, and on his mother's side to Alcmaeon, son of Megacles. His father, Cleinias, fitted out a trireme at his own expense and fought at Artemisium. Later, he fell at Chaeronea, fighting the Boeotians. Orphaned, the boy passed into the guardianship of Pericles and Ariphron. Few children were more adorned with gifts. Never was beauty more enduring, charming alike in boyhood, youth, and full-grown manhood. Even his lisp, so Aristophanes tells, lent grace to his speech, softening words into persuasion. Poets mocked, friends adored. Such was the double-edged fascination of Alkibiades. From childhood, he revealed a fierce appetite for distinction. Once in wrestling, to avoid being thrown, he bit his opponent's hand. When accused of fighting like a woman, he retorted, "No, like a lion." Another time, playing at knucklebones in a narrow street, his throw fell in the path of an oncoming wagon. The driver urged on. The other boys shrank aside. Alkibiades laid himself full length before the horses. The driver stopped in terror, the lesson plain. Alkibiades would yield nothing, not even to wagons. He obeyed teachers, save one. He refused to learn the flute, protesting it disfigured the face, inflated the mouth, robbed the player of speech. Let Thebans learn the flute, for they cannot speak. Athenians have Athena and Apollo, patrons of wisdom and music, and both rejected the flute. Thus jesting, he cast it aside. All Athens heard, and soon flute-playing was despised, driven from fashion by the charm of one youth's disdain. There were darker tales. Antiphon declared he ran away to an admirer's house, or killed a slave at the gymnasium with a club. Perhaps these were slanders. Enemies could not resist defaming a figure so dazzling. His beauty gathered a swarm of powerful admirers. But one love shaped him most, that of Socrates. The philosopher pierced through flattery, laid bare ignorance, rebuked conceit. Alkibiades, shaken, humbled, drawn by reverence and awe, clung to him. They fought together, camped together, each saving the other's life in war, at Potidaea and again at Delium. The world marveled that the insolent darling of Athens followed that ugly, poor, barefoot philosopher like a disciple after a god. Still, Alkibiades could be insolent with others. Anytus, the son of Anthemion, once entertained guests. Alkibiades, drunk at his own feast, burst in, spied the gold and silver cups, told slaves to take half, and left laughing. The guests fumed. Anytus soothed them. "Nay, be grateful. He left us the other half." Such was his way with most. Yet once, when a poor metic gave him his entire fortune, only 100 staters, Alkibiades laughed, made him sup with him, then returned the sum, and forced him to outbid the tax farmers in market contracts. When they turned on the man, Alkibiades stood surety. The farmers backed down and paid him off heavily to withdraw. Thus, by arrogant kindness, the beggar found himself rich. But pride and passion made him reckless. He once struck Hipponicus, father of Callias, without cause, merely to win a wager with friends who dared him. The city was scandalized. At dawn, Alkibiades came to Hipponicus' house, bared his body, and offered it for punishment. Hipponicus forgave him, and gave him later his daughter, Hipparete. Yet he treated her vilely, filling their home with courtesans until she fled. When she petitioned for divorce, he seized her himself in the marketplace and marched her home, no citizen daring to oppose him. She bore it until her death. His insolent wit charmed Athenians as much as it offended them. He kept a magnificent dog, prized for its great tail, and cut it off. When friends asked why he marred such beauty, he said laughing, "So men may chatter of my dog's tail, and forget to speak of my graver faults." He entered politics early, eloquent beyond most. The orators and comedians bear witness. Demosthenes himself named him most persuasive of speakers. Quick of wit, fertile in invention, he yet often paused, searching for the exact word, the desire not merely to speak, but to speak perfectly. At Olympia his glory soared. No man, king or citizen, ever matched his spectacle. 7 racing chariots he entered at once, and won first, second, and fourth prizes. Euripides himself composed verses to him. Son of Cleinias, threefold crown, first, second, third, thine own renown. Olives thrice upon thy head, thy name thrice the herald said. Greek cities showered him with gifts, Ephesus with tents, Chios with fodder, Lesbos with wine. Yet even this triumph stank of misdeed. One Diomedes had asked him to purchase a chariot from Argos. Alkibiades entered it in his own name at Olympia, robbing his friend. A trial followed. Such was his glory, and such his grasping arrogance. Politically, his rivals were Phaeax, urbane in private but feeble in public address, and Nicias, elder, cautious, admired. But Alkibiades surpassed them both in eloquence and daring. He even turned aside an ostracism meant for himself by uniting factions to banish Hyperbolus instead. So low and vile a man that comic poets mocked the ostracism itself as sullied for stooping to touch him. Such contradictions marked him always. Bold yet insecure, generous yet grasping, cultivated yet insolent, student of Socrates yet slave of his own passions. Alkibiades dazzled his city as no man of his age, Athens' fairest, fiercest, most dangerous child. Alkibiades chafed at the honor showered upon Nicias. It was Nicias, not he, whom Sparta courted. Nicias whose peace bore his name. Nicias who was praised as the man who undid the war that Pericles began. The vanity of Alkibiades could scarcely endure it. Though he had been proxenos of Sparta at Athens, flattering Spartans, befriending even those prisoners captured at Pylos, yet in the end all gratitude fell to Nicias. So, gnawed with envy, Alkibiades began to plot the ruin of the peace. Argos, Elis, Mantinia, states unfriendly to Lacedaemon, he wooed by persuasion and secret promises. He inflamed Athens with rage over Sparta's breach of faith, for they had handed back Panactus dismantled, its walls cast down. He stood in the assembly denouncing Nicias. He freed the Spartans taken at Sphacteria. He gained favor by cowardice. Yet the Lacedaemonians ally with Boeotians and Corinthians, while Athens is shackled, forbidden to friend any city not pleasing to Sparta. Then Sparta sent envoys, full powers men, to restore friendship. The Senate welcomed them. The next day they would speak before the people. Alkibiades deceived them. Privately he warned, "Declare not plenipotence. The assembly is fierce, say so, and they'll wring you dry. Hold back, and I'll guide you as your friend." Oaths sealed it. Then, when they stood before the people, he demanded their authority. They denied full power. At once he turned, thunderous in denunciation. Liars, equivocators, faithless. The people roared with wrath. Nicaeas staggered in dismay. The Spartan embassy humiliated. The peace of Nicaeas was shattered. Now elected general, Alkibiades forged an alliance with Argos, Elis, Mantinia, an anti-Spartan bloc across the Peloponnesus. The battle at Mantinia shook Greece. The Argive revolution, the long walls he urged them to build. His advice to Patrae, better to be swallowed by Athens, foot first, than seized by Sparta at the head. All these strengthened his personal sway as much as his country's cause. Yet, while he counseled empire on land as well as sea, his life seemed the strut of a tyrant. His trireme was altered to house his couch, the deck cut away so he might sleep in luxury. His shield bore not his lineage, but Eros, god of love, wielding thunderbolts. He paraded through the agora in long trailing robes. Aristophanes wrote of him, "The people love him, hate him, cannot live without him." Another comic poet warned, "Raise not a lion's whelp, he will grow to master you." Athenians endured him for his eloquence, his race, his fortune, his generosity in funding festivals, his beauty and charisma. They excused his outrages as youth's follies. He locked up the painter Agatharchus until he decorated his house, then dismissed him with gifts. He struck rivals, seized captives, took a Melian woman for mistress after the slaughter of her male kin, glossed over as good nature. Yet older men muttered. One Alkibiades was more than Greece could bear. Even Timon the misanthrope, crossing him once in a triumphal escort, clasped his hand and said, "Go on, my boy, grow greater. Your glory will bring this multitude to ruin." Half jeered, half shuddered. All felt the danger. Then came Sicily. The Athenians had long toyed with dreams of conquest there. But it was Alkibiades who fanned kindling into flame, who urged an armada to subdue Syracuse, and through Syracuse, Carthage, Libya, Italy, even the Peloponnesus itself. To him, Sicily was not an end, but a beginning, a vast granary and arsenal for an empire without limit. The young men thrilled to the vision, sketching maps of the great island, traces of Carthage and Libya beyond. Only Socrates, his daimon whispering warning, and Meton the astronomer, feigned madness to keep his son from sailing. Only they foresaw ruin. But Nicaeas, unwilling, fearful, was voted as co-general, lest Alkibiades' fire run unchecked. The bold Lamachus was the third. The assembly voted vast powers. Even Demostratus decreed, "The generals shall demand what stores they will, and conduct war as they think fit." So an armament was readied greater than any Greece had yet seen. Then omens came. The women wailed for Adonis in ritual mourning. Figures of death paraded through Athens. But worse, the one night's work that shook the city. The Hermae mutilated, every sacred statue disfigured. Rage, terror, rumors of conspiracy gnawed at the people. Slaves and informers accused Alkibiades and his friends, mocking the mysteries in drunken revel, parodying the herald, the torchbearer, the hierophant, Alkibiades himself playing the high priest. Thessalus, son of Simon, brought an indictment of sacrilege. The sailors and soldiers adored him. Argives and Mantineans swore they would never leave him to injustice. He came forward boldly to defend himself. His enemies, fearing acquittal, contrived to delay the trial. Let him sail. When his work is done, the laws will remain. he can return to stand judgment. Alkibiades protested, "My enemies cut me off from justice. If guilty, let me die here. If innocent, let me go free of slanders when I face the enemy abroad." But the crowd yielded. He sailed, not acquitted, not condemned, but under the shadow of destruction, leading Athens' greatest fleet at the very moment his own fate hung in the balance. The great Sicilian armada set sail, 140 triremes, 5,000 hoplites, and more besides. Alkibiades was at its head with Nicias and Lamachus. Yet scarcely had they begun when word came summoning him home to stand trial. The charges, once vague suspicion, now blazed into fury. Informers accused him of impiety, linking the mutilation of the Hermae to profanation of the mysteries, a single conspiracy, they claimed, against religion and the democracy itself. Prison after prison filled. The friends of Alkibiades, men of birth or merely of acquaintance, suffered confiscation, harsh imprisonment, and death. The accusations came foul and thin. One swore he saw the statue breakers by the light of the moon, but it had been the night of the new moon. Such contradictions troubled the thoughtful, but not the mob. The city thirsted for guilt and turned savagely upon Alkibiades. The orator and Docides himself, scion distantly of Odysseus, was seized. His family statue of Hermes alone stood untouched. Suspicion clung to him. In prison, a fellow captive persuaded him to save his life through informing. Better, he reasoned, to sacrifice a few names to the frenzy of the people than for all aristocrats to perish. And Docides confessed, denounced even his servants, and won pardon. Others were condemned, executed, or fled. Still the Athenians raged, until they fixed on Alkibiades as the true author of all sacrilege. They sent him aboard the Salaminian trireme, not bound like a criminal, but flattered, gently urged, "Come back, clear yourself." They feared mutiny if they struck at him directly, for the sailors idolized him. The Argives and Mantineans served almost for him alone. But Alkibiades knew Athens. "I would not trust even my own mother," he said, "for fear she mistake a black bean for white when my life is in the vote." At Thurii he vanished, slipped away. When later he heard Athens condemned him to death, goods confiscated, curses pronounced even by priests, he laughed. "I will show them I live." Only Theano, priestess of Agralos, refused the decree. "I was consecrated to pray, not to curse." Where could Alkibiades turn? He fled to Argos, then to Sparta. There he promised the Spartans he would do them greater service, now than all the harm he ever had wrought. They welcomed him. At his urging they acted. They sent Gylippus to Syracuse to crush Athens' Sicilian army. They declared war anew. And most grievous of all, they fortified Decelia in Attica, a wound from which Athens bled until her fall. Meanwhile he astonished the Spartans by the art he had to deceive. He cut his hair short, bathed in cold water, and ate their black broth. Once perfumed and decadent, he now seemed a model Spartan. His gift was metamorphosis, chameleon-like, shifting character to wherever fortune bore him. In Sparta, a Lycurgan youth. In Ionia, a pleasure-seeker. In Thrace, a drinker. In Thessaly, a horseman. In Persia, rival of satraps in pomp. But it was always a mask, not essence. For in Sparta, he betrayed Sparta too. He seduced the queen Timea, wife of King Agis. The boy she bore she called Leotychides, but whispered among friends the true father was Alkibiades. He himself jested. Not lust, but policy, I wished my line to reign in Sparta. King Agis, reckoning months, estranged from his wife, believed it. The boy would never take the throne. Meanwhile, Alkibiades swayed Spartan policy, traveled to Ionia, turned city after city to revolt against Athens. Yet envy and wrath gathered around him. Orders went forth for his execution. So again he slipped away, this time to Tissaphernes, satrap of Persia. The satrap delighted in him, crooked, loving crooked. He named his Pharis park the Alkibiades. Daily they schemed. He urged him, do not give too much aid to Sparta. Starve their armies, keep balance between warring Hellenes, so Persia might devour both in time. Tissaphernes heeded him. Thus Alkibiades from exile bent the war itself to his cunning. And in Athens, with fleet still at Samos, fear grew of Persia's Phoenician armada of 150 ships. Then Alkibiades reached out, secret overtures. Restore me, trust me. I will turn Tissaphernes to Athens, but not for the mob. Only if the nobles take command and curb the insolence of the people. Save Athens yourselves. I will be your instrument. The leaders wavered. One, Phrynichus, saw through it. He covets only a pretext to return. He warned the Spartans. But the Spartan admiral betrayed the warning to Tissaphernes, who laughed with Alkibiades. Phrynichus tried again, promising to deliver even the fleet, but again betrayed. So Phrynichus, desperate, warned Athens of an imminent attack, thus saving himself through real service. Alkibiades still denounced him, accusing him of treason, but no one believed it. Later, when Phrynichus was slain in the marketplace, they judged him guilty posthumously and crowned his assassins. Thus around Alkibiades swirled treachery, loyalty, betrayal, exile, and recall, ever shifting, ever dazzling. Wherever he turned, he bent the hearts of men and the fates of cities. At Samos, his friends now supreme, Alkibiades' hand began to reach back toward Athens itself. His allies in the fleet sent Pisander to the city to demolish the democracy and empower the nobles, promising that only thus could Alkibiades and Tissaphernes become true allies of Athens. So rose the rule of the 5,000, though in truth they were but the 400, an oligarchy that seized power, silenced the commons, and bathed early resistance in blood. Yet at Samos the fleet still held its freedom. There the sailors seethed at news of despotism at home, eager to sail for Piraeus in vengeance. They summoned Alkibiades, saluted him as general, and begged him to lead them back to strike Athens itself. But he showed not rash ambition, but rare restraint. He checked their fury, pointed out the folly of civil war. Without his voice, Athens' empire might have collapsed in an instant, her fleet ravaging her own coasts, while Ionia and the islands fell to the Peloponnesians without a fight. By persuasion, entreaty, and with Thrasybulus at his side booming in his thunderous voice, he restrained them. This one act, more than any raid or battle, saved what remained of Athenian power. Then came fresh maneuvers. The Phoenician fleet of Persia, long shadow over the Aegean, hovered at Aspendus. 150 triremes, it was said, ready to decide the sea for whichever ally they joined. Yet, whether by Alkibiades' hand or by Tissaphernes' crooked counsels, the fleet never sailed. Both Greeks believed they owed the delay to him. The Athenians grateful, the Spartans enraged, convinced he played Persia like a double game to prolong their slaughter. The oligarchy fell. Athens turned once more to her people. The assembly even voted for Alkibiades' recall. Yet he hesitated. He would not return empty, dependent on fickle kindness. He would come crowned with victory. Soon the chance came. Mindarus, Sparta's admiral, had sailed north into the Hellespont. The Athenians shadowed him. Alkibiades gathered 18 triremes and sped to join them. At Abydos, he arrived at dusk, in the midst of a battle unresolved. New sails on the horizon unnerved both sides. But when he raised the Athenian ensign and struck the enemy, the day turned. 30 Peloponnesian ships were taken, Athenians restored their own, and trophies were raised. He pushed on, burning with glory. Yet his triumph was short-circuited. At Sardis, Tissaphernes seized him, fearing Persian suspicion, and threw him in chains. But Alkibiades slipped prison, as he had courts and councils before, escaping on horseback to Clazomenae. He spread rumor he had been secretly released, shaming Tissaphernes, and rejoined the fleet. Then came the dazzling victory of Cyzicus. With cunning he drew the Peloponnesians into battle, feigned weakness, then brought his whole force crashing upon them. Mindarus fell. The Spartan fleet was utterly destroyed. The city stormed. A Spartan dispatch intercepted told the tale in bleak brevity. Our ships are gone. Mindarus is slain. The men are starving. We know not what to do. From triumph to triumph, he swept the Hellespont, binding towns, raising contributions, subduing Chalcedon, seizing Selymbria, retaking Byzantium by boldest night assault. Never had the Athenians so risen again from defeat, and it was all by Alcibiades' hand. At last, longing to dazzle his city, and his city, after long hatred longing to see him, he turned homeward. His fleet glittered with trophies, laden with spoils, 200 prizes taken or destroyed. Ancient sources embroidered his pageant return with actors, purple sails, and flute players, but sober historians deny it. Far from swagger, he returned in caution. After so many turns of fortune, he dared not land until from the deck of his flagship he saw with his own eyes Eurypylmus, Thrasybulus, his kinsmen and friends, gathered in welcome upon the shore. Thus, after years of exile, betrayal, and brilliance, Alcibiades once more set foot on his native soil, triumphant, admired, but never safe from the shifting winds of fortune that forever shadowed his life. The life of Caius Marcius Coriolanus. From the noble line of the Marcii sprang many illustrious Romans, kings, consuls, censors. Among them Ancus Marcius, grandson of Numa, once reigned in Rome. From the same house came also Censorinus, who held the highest office twice until law forbade it, and Publius and Quintus Marcius, who brought fresh waters to the city. From this stock was born a child named Caius Marcius, the man later called Coriolanus. He was fatherless, reared in the house of his widowed mother, Volumnia. This taught him austerity and sternness, but not softness. Educated by her devotion, he proved orphanhood can lead to greatness, provided nature is noble. Yet lacking discipline, his high spirit was wild. Like rich soil untilled, he produced both fruits and weeds. From youth he burned for war. He believed weapons were useless without strength, so he hardened his body, swift in running, tireless in grappling, iron in endurance. He entered his first campaign still young, when Tarquin the Proud sought to regain his throne. In that battle Marcius saved a citizen fallen in the dust, slew his assailant, and was crowned with the oak garland, the civic crown Rome awards to one who preserves the life of a fellow citizen. That day, it was said, the Dioscuri themselves galloped from a field to Rome, their horses draped in sweat, announcing victory, and July the 15th was kept forever sacred to them. But for Marcius, this early distinction was a gale behind a ship. It drove him to ever greater feats. Each campaign brought him spoils of honor, never returning without trophies. Yet his glory pleased him chiefly because of Volumnia. To see his mother's tears of joy, to hear her praised as mother of the bravest Roman, this, to him, was the summit of triumph. Even when he married, it was at her request, and he never left her home, lavishing upon her the love of son and father both. But Rome was seething. The poor were weighed down by debts, cast into prison by their creditors, even veterans scarred by war. Promises of reform were broken, and at last the plebs seceded, withdrawing from the city and sitting armed upon the sacred mount by the Anio. They spoke bitterly. Water, air, and soil could be had in any part of Italy. Why serve Rome only to be chained by the rich? The Senate sent mediators. Menenius Agrippa, plain and wise, told them his fable of the body and the belly. showing how even the idle stomach gives life to every limb. Reconciliation followed. Out of this secession came the people's tribunes, first protectors of the plebs. Marcius, though scornful of concessions, stirred his patrician fellows to match the plebs in zeal for war. Soon that zeal was tested. Rome besieged Corioli, proud Volscian stronghold, while Consul Cominius led one part against relieving enemies in the field. Titus Lartius maintained the siege. The garrison sallied, scattering the thin Roman line. But there Marcius towered. Wounded, sweating, he stood unshaken, his cries like trumpet blasts, his presence striking fear into Volscians as much as his blade. He rallied Romans, drove the enemy back into the city, and, seeing the gates open, cried that fortune herself had invited them forward. Alone, or nearly so, he plunged into the streets of Corioli. Fighting amid chaos, he slew and pressed until others dared follow. So the gates were seized, and soon the city was taken. When many Romans tried to plunder, Marcius raged. "Glory," he said, "lay not in riches, while comrades fought outside." With a few, he hastened after Cominius, praying not to arrive too late for the battle. Bloodied and exhausted, he reached the field, told the consul that Corioli had fallen, and begged the hardest station against Antium's men, proudest of the Volscians. There, at the center, he struck like a thunderbolt, breaking their ranks, nearly overwhelmed, rescued by Roman charge, then pressing yet again, fighting though weary and wounded. Rome triumphed, land and city on the same day. When rewards were offered, prisoners and spoils abundant, Cominius bade Marcius chose a tenth. He accepted only a war horse, refused all else, and asked but one favor: freedom for a Volscian guest friend taken captive. His selflessness drew more cheers than his valor. Men saw true greatness now, in victory over greed greater than victory in war. So they gave him, beyond spoils, a name, Coriolanus, the man of Corioli. From then his personal name Caius, his family Marcius, were joined with that immortal mark of his exploit. As Greeks had called men the victor or the preserver, so Rome gave him this title, earned in a single day of daring. Thus began the legend of Coriolanus, Rome's fiercest son, her most valiant soldier, and, as time would prove, her most dangerous citizen. In Rome, surnames often sprang from deeds, defects, or quirks. A man bound his wound with a diadem, and so Metellus became Diadematus. Another, from speed in preparing gladiators, was called Celer, the swift. Children were named for the fortunes of their birth: Proculus, if the father was away; Posthumus, if the father was dead. Even imperfections gave rise to names: Sulla, the pimply; Niger, the swarthy; Rufus, the red-haired; Caecus, the blind; Claudius, the lame. So the Romans wore their peculiarities without shame. But these were trifles beside the storm about to engulf the name of Coriolanus. Peace had scarcely returned when famine struck Rome. Rich fields lay barren, trade was poor, no corn in the markets. The demagogues seized their chance, crying that the patricians had hoarded grain to punish the plebs. At this moment, envoys from Velletri offered their plague-stricken city to Rome. The Senate seized the chance. Here was a remedy, a place to send the lawless and violent, to purge discord by removing the worst agitators. Colonists were drawn, while others were enrolled for war against the Volsci. But the tribunes Sicinius and Brutus howled that this was tyranny cloaked in piety, banishing the poor to pestilential soil, driving the rest into needless war. The people mutinied again, refusing to serve. Confusion fell on the Senate, until Marcius stepped forth. Stern, proud, full of patrician fire, he raised troops from his own clients and volunteers. With these few he struck into Antium, carried off cattle, prisoners, and corn, and returned with none for himself, all for the state. His enemies seethed, his glory burned brighter, their shame deeper. Soon he stood for the consulship. For 17 years he had borne scars from every field. On the day of canvassing he walked bare and humble as Roman custom required, toga ungirt, to show his wounds. The people, abashed, whispered that surely this man must be consul. But on the election day he entered the forum surrounded by senators and patricians, and the sight stirred envy. Fear mingled with resentment. What if this patrician hero, backed by all the nobles, should crush the liberties of the plebs? The tide turned. 2 others were chosen. Marcius lost. The Senate raged, but Marcius himself raged more, storming at the insult, nurturing wrath instead of fixing it with patience. For he had never learned the temper required of statesmen: endurance, self-restraint, the art to bend and soothe. His friends, the young aristocrats, only inflamed him further with sympathy tinged by pride. Then came new fuel. Corn arrived, much of it a gift from Gelon of Syracuse. Hope leapt in plebeian hearts. Perhaps the grain would be free, or at least cheap. But Coriolanus rose in the Senate and poured bitter scorn upon them. "Give largesse," he cried. "You turn riot into law. You pay them to rebel. Already their tribunes have usurped your power. Already they despise the consul's fasces. You would fatten their insolence by feeding them for nothing? Better take from them this tribuneship which has torn the state in two. Better end this pestilence of democracy than reward it with gifts." The young patricians shouted their approval. Older senators frowned, fearful of consequence. And consequence came swiftly. The tribunes rushed into the forum with furious cries. They declared Marcius was plotting tyranny, that he sought to abolish their office, that he defied their summons, even struck their aides in open contempt. A crowd gathered, torches flared, blood seemed near. Summoned before the people, Marcius came, but instead of humbling himself, he spoke with cutting pride, bordering on accusation of his audience. His tone, his face, his fearless disdain enraged them further. Then Sicinius, boldest of the tribunes, pronounced sentence. Marcius was condemned to death, to be thrown from the Tarpeian rock. The aediles seized him. Horror rippled, even among the crowd. The patricians leapt to rescue him, driving back the officers, locking their champion in their midst. In the uproar, violence raged nearly to civil war, till night forced all apart. Next day, the tribunes, cooling, saw the danger. They offered a compromise. Marcius should not be executed illegally, but tried before the people at the next assembly. The patricians, relieved, consented. Thus Coriolanus, savior of Rome at Corioli, now faced judgment at the hands of those he had once protected. And the city of Rome, torn between aristocracy and commons, braced itself for the trial of the proudest of her sons. Rome had condemned him. By the vote of the tribes, by the voices not of veterans, but of a rabble, Caius Marcius Coriolanus was banished forever. The people rejoiced as at a festival. The Senate mourned as at a funeral. But Marcius himself, proud and motionless, betrayed no grief, only a smoldering fire within. He embraced his mother Volumnia, his wife Virgilia, and went forth from the city gates, followed by patricians in silent honor. For days he lingered, restless, his mind divided, until rage gained the mastery. If Rome had cast him out, he would arm her enemies. He turned to the Volscians, long humiliated by Roman arms. In Antium dwelt Tullus Aufidius, Volscian leader, a man who had crossed blades with Marcius in battle, and hated him beyond all Romans. Yet Coriolanus knew the great spirit of his foe, and chose him. One evening he entered Antium in disguise, went unrecognized through the streets, and seated himself, silent and hooded, at the hearth of Aufidius. When his rival confronted him, Marcius flung back his cloak. "I am Caius Marcius, called Coriolanus, the man who has harmed you more than all Rome beside. Exiled by my people, betrayed by my peers, I ask not shelter but vengeance. Use me against Rome. As their enemy, I can serve you better than ever I wronged you as their soldier. Refuse, and I ask for death. Accept, and I am your weapon." Tullus, astonished and delighted, clasped his hand. "Rise, Marcius. You have given us no exile, but a gift." Soon rumor spread. Rome quarreled within, plebs versus patricians, but always her fears turned to Coriolanus, now leading Volscian councils. Then, as if Providence aided him, Rome made a proclamation at her public games that all Volscians quit the city before sunset, whether an insult prompted by him or chance. Furious, the Volscians decreed war. And in assembly they named Marcius commander with Aufidius, though the people roared for Marcius alone. He wasted no time. With volunteers, not conscripts, he fell suddenly upon Roman lands, rich with plunder. Yet note his craft. Plebeian fields he burned and reaped, but patrician estates he spared. Thus in Rome his enemies raged more bitterly against each other. The poor, furious that aristocrats were untouched. The patricians, pitying the exile they themselves had abandoned. Coriolanus' fame grew. Town after town fell. Circeii, Tullium, Labici, Pedum, and Bola were taken by storm, their people enslaved. Others that yielded he treated gently, even shielding their fields from his troops. At Bali, barely 12 miles from Rome, he slew the men and carried off immense spoils. Soldiers from every Volscian city flocked to his banner, crying he alone was their general. Panic gripped Rome. The Latins begged aid, the consuls delayed. Civil strife consumed the city until word came. Lavinium itself, sacred town of Aeneas, with the oldest shrines of Rome's gods, lay under siege. Then the plebeians who cast him out cried suddenly to recall him. They rushed to annul his sentence, to beg for his return. But the Senate refused. They would not recall him by popular decree, nor break the plebs restoring the man they had banished. Worse, Marcius heard of this refusal. Burning with wrath he left Lavinium, marched straight on to Rome, and encamped at the Cluilian trenches, 5 miles from the walls. The city shook with terror. Women wept in the streets. Old men clung to shrines, magistrates and senate alike paralyzed. At last, unity was born of fear. They sent envoys, kinsmen of his own blood, out through the gates to his camp. They found him on a Volscian throne, commanders arrayed about him. They pleaded with tears, but he replied coldly, "You banished me. Now you must restore what you stole from my allies. Return Volscian lands, grant them equal rights with Latins. Only thus, not with entreaty, can there be peace. 30 days I give you, deliberate well." With that he dismissed them, his army already in motion, and Rome knew. The fate of the city now lay not in her legions, but in the vengeance of a single man she had once called Coriolanus. The glory of Marcius began to turn against him. Among the Volscians, jealousy festered. Tullus Aufidius, long overshadowed, saw his own star eclipsed, his rival raised above him by the fierce renown of Rome's banished son. Men whispered that Marcius had betrayed the war, granting Rome 30 days to breathe, and thus giving her new strength. While they murmured, Coriolanus struck hard at Rome's allies, stormed towns, seized spoils, and took captives. The Romans, benumbed, dared not meet him in battle. When the 30 days expired, he stood again before the walls. Rome sent embassies of persuasion. Priests in sacred robes invoked the gods on her behalf. Still, he was unmoved. "Restore the Volscians their lands, their rights," he insisted, "or the war continues." Rome, frozen between pride and terror, yielded only words. Then, when hope seemed lost, salvation came from quarters least imagined. Within the city, the women thronged the temples, praying, weeping. Among them rose Valeria, sister of the great Publicola, moved, as if by divine impulse, to lead them to Volumnia, mother of Coriolanus. There, with Virgilia the wife and the little children of the exile, she pleaded, "Come with us. Beg him for mercy. Save Rome, as the Sabine women once saved both husbands and fathers." Volumnia wavered, but at last consented, saying with bitter irony, "Rome must rest her hopes on women." And so the procession went forth, matrons, wives, and children, into the Volscian camp. The enemy fell silent at the sight. Coriolanus, stern upon his tribunal, saw them approach. But when he knew his mother, his wife, his children, his composure broke. He ran to embrace them, his tears ungoverned. Volumnia spoke first. With grief and majesty, she showed him their misery, pleading that he not set son against mother, husband against wife, father against children. "You may conquer Rome," she cried, "but first you must trample the body of her who gave you life. Choose, will you be your mother's destroyer or her son?" At these words she and Virgilia fell at his feet with the children. Coriolanus groaned aloud, "Mother, you have conquered. Rome is saved, but I am ruined." He raised camp and withdrew. Some Volscians praised him, others disdained the weakness. Yet all obeyed. Rome, delivered, filled her temples with rejoicing, lauded her women, and gave them lasting honor. The temple of Fortuna Muliebris, fortune of women. But back in Antium, envy never slept. Tullus Aufidius and his faction prepared their deed. Summoned to account, Coriolanus claimed command from the whole Volscian nation, not from Antium alone. In the assembly he would have swayed the multitude, for his voice was mighty, his presence awe-inspiring. But Tullus and conspirators rushed upon him, denounced him as traitor, and struck him down. So perished Caius Marcius Coriolanus, not by Roman hands but by those he had served, his reward for saving Rome at a mother's cry. Yet the Volscian people repented. Crowds came from every city to honor his corpse. Warriors hung arms and trophies on his tomb. Rome, on hearing, showed neither triumph nor insult. She permitted only this, that her women, who had once saved the city by their tears, might mourn him for 10 months, as though he were to each a father, a son, or a brother. Without him, the Volscians fell into quarrels with allies, took defeat at Roman hands, and lost their liberty forever. Thus ended Coriolanus, first savior, then scourge, at last victim to his own unbending pride, honored in death by both foes and enemies, remembered always as the man too great to bend, yet not too great to yield when a mother knelt before him. Comparison of Alkibiades and Coriolanus. Now that we have traced the lives of both men, let us weigh them against each other. In valor and military talent, the balance hangs nearly even. Both were bold in the field, masters of strategy, and dangerous alike as champions of their own country and as leaders of its enemies. Yet perhaps Alkibiades proved the more complete general, for victories fell to him alike on sea and land. But in policy, both erred, though in opposite extremes. Alkibiades charmed the masses with insolence, coaxed them with flattery, used unworthy arts to grasp their favor. Coriolanus, by contrast, disdained the people with frigid hauteur, thrust from him whatever love they might have borne, and sought to govern by fear alone. If the one was too pliant, the other was too hard, and it is surely less shameful to seek the goodwill of citizens, however basely, than to wage open war on them out of scorn. Alkibiades is accused of guile, most plainly when by trickery he deceived the Spartan envoys and destroyed the treaty of peace. Yet that very fraud secured to Athens her great alliance with Argos and Mantinea. Coriolanus, too, it should be remembered, provoked the Volsci to war by falsely accusing them during a Roman festival, not from statecraft, but from passion and wrath, spreading ruin across Italy for no end but vengeance. Alkibiades, when banished, returned gladly when his country relented. Even in exile he counseled Athenian generals, though they were not his friends, to guide them away from folly. Coriolanus, by contrast, punished Rome as though all had wronged him alike. Senators who stood by him no less than tribunes who condemned him, repelling embassies, defying priests, and waging war not for his recall, but for the ruin of his mother city. In the matter of wealth, too, they differ. Alkibiades sought bribes, lavished them on pleasures and pomp. Coriolanus spurned money, yet pressed the poor so harshly that men said his cruelty came not from greed, but from pride. And pride is no lighter fault. Here, then, is a sharp contrast. Alkibiades, whatever his betrayals, could not extinguish the love of his city. Again and again Athens recalled him. Even hated, he was longed for. Coriolanus, though noble in deed and incorrupt, never won the people's love. Admired by all, he was cherished by none. Consider further. Alkibiades achieved great ends when at the head of Athenians, and when present in the camp, success was almost certain. Coriolanus never prospered as Rome's own general, but only when he bore arms against her. Alkibiades died in exile, but by the plots of assassins fearing his wit. Coriolanus died too by conspiracy, but he, by his unbending temper, had armed jealous comrades against him and given cause for their envy to strike. Finally, behold their temperaments. Marcius was lofty, incorrupt, frugal, scornful of wealth, harshly devoted to virtue. Yet his very nobility became offensive, for he knew not how to win men's hearts. Alkibiades was dissipated, luxurious, given to vice, yet open, companionable, winning all by charm. Where Marcius was feared, Alkibiades was loved, even loved by those he had wronged. Thus, the Roman was the sterner, purer, prouder soul, yet his pride destroyed both him and his cause. The Athenian was corrupt, dazzling, and reckless, yet his very faults, tempered by charm, gave him the power to return, again and again, as savior of the state that condemned him.